This is an iconic patch we wear. For those officers that have had the opportunity to travel anywhere in this country, they know it. They know the way other police departments look at our police department. It's an honor that we embrace, and we're going to take the lead on this. We're going to take point position, and we are going to push a message of empathy, compassion, and support, and we're going to have that message delivered by the right people, and do everything we can to overcorrect and change culture and get us back to middle and get us back to safe for ourselves and for our families. But it's going to take all of us. It is absolutely going to take all of us, but it's worth it. Our families are worth it.
We as a department, as a police force, have been told to have this type of attitude, feelings towards the public. We want to be more empathetic. We want to be reaching out, making connections. But yes, we are starting to have this conversation. Well, we need to have that with our own officers. We need to treat them like we want them to treat our citizens. So it is important that we pay attention to their emotional health, to their mental health, to their physical health overall, if we want them to be successful whenever they're making citizen contacts.
I popped the trunk, retrieved my rifle, and when I look over the trunk, I see officers in the intersection that were ducking behind their cars yelling at me, "Get out of there, get out of there. He's right there." I saw bullet holes in the glass and the pillar. Just so you realize how close I was, or we were to the shooter, he was actually around the corner applying tourniquets when we rolled up.
So when you think of what the brain is being exposed to when you are having that front row seat to something really traumatic, it's going to show up for you. It's not something you decide. The limbic system is very quick, and it's designed to call you to action, and it allows you to be really good at what you do. There's a consequence to the stress response. The benefits are, again, it helps you do what you need to do very efficiently, but then what goes up must come down, and it's like a seesaw.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
If you don't like what's being said, change the conversation. Don Draper. For years, decades, the first responder community didn't have a conversation about wellness. Whether it's emotional, financial, physical, spiritual, first responders are told to toughen up, bury it, get over it. The next incident, the next act of violence awaits. And it truly does. The world of the first responder never stops. The critical incidents, the violence, the major accidents with mangled bodies, the taking the job home affecting home life, ruining relationships with their spouse or the kids. First responders are so used to saving people, sometimes they don't stop to think they may need to save themselves. The Dallas Police Department is long overdue a revamp in its approach to wellness. Chief Garcia mandated a change. After months of meetings and hard discussions and putting heads together, we were finally moving forward with a new unit, the OWL Initiative. Owls are symbolic of wisdom, education, time, and transition. Education of overall wellness, emotional, physical, spiritual, and financial wellness is paramount. Time is of the essence in officers' wellness. And officers transitioning from a poor state of wellness to a better, more equipped, better version of themselves. And here to do that, the Dallas PD is proud to present the new Dallas PD Wellness Unit. Today we're having a roundtable to discuss this program. We're sitting down with the Assistant Chief of Police Reuben Ramirez, Lieutenant Lisette Rivera, and Sergeant Omar Figueroa. Chief Ramirez, Lieutenant Rivera, and Sergeant Figueroa, thank you for joining us and welcome to the OWL.
Glad to be here.
We also have a very special guest co-host that came in from Frisco, Texas, but by way of California. We're not holding that against her. Dr. Heather Twaddell. It's her second time on this podcast. Doc, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about FIRST again. I know a lot of the listeners have already heard about your organization, and you're also one of the ATO counselors.
Yes, so FIRST is a comprehensive wellness program for first responders and their family members. So when you think of comprehensive, you have to think of all of the ways that this job takes a toll on your whole system. So we equipped our team up with first responder psychologists, therapists, strength and conditioning coaches, physical therapists, nutrition, basically everything needed to help you guys navigate the career that many can't do, won't do, because our goal is to help you rebound as quickly as possible from the things you endure. I wish we could take away some of the stuff that you guys endure, but it comes with the territory. So instead, we have to be very strategic with how we prepare you for it, how we recover you from it. And the goal is to keep you healthy, because you can have a healthy life and do this type of work, but not without awareness, intentionality, and a good team around you. So that's where FIRST comes into play.
Doc, how long have you been doing this?
Gosh, so like you said, I did move from California, but when I lived in California, I graduated in 2011, and so I've been doing this type of work since then. I did work with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department before moving to Texas as a law enforcement psychologist, and once I got to Texas, kind of did a little North Texas tour, checking out what departments had when it comes to the preventative side as well as the recovery side. And that's really where FIRST originated, and FIRST has been up and running for about 3 years now.
And what is your doctorate in?
Forensic psychology. But I specialize in working with first responders and their family members. And then I'm also, first responder family member myself, dad and brother are police officers, mom's a nurse, other brothers in private security, sister-in-law was a dispatcher. So we're a fun group.
Yeah, they've seen a lot of trauma.
Yes.
So Doc, when you did your tour of North Texas, what was your initial thoughts of the state of the departments in this area?
Yeah, what I thought was, and the pillars of FIRST are prepare, endure, recover. So I always have an ear out for when we talk about resilience and wellness, which they're such buzzwords right now. And when you sit down with many, they have a hard time actually saying how they actually provide that. And so when I did my little North Texas tour, I think departments have gotten good at the recovery column, either through things like EAP or debriefs, and obviously, the therapy through knowing other resources, but there's not enough on the prepare side. I think peer teams is where you come in on the endure column, the individuals who step forward when they know their peers have gone through something to help them make sure they, walk that path as tactfully as possible so, again, they can recover quickly. But when it comes to preparing officers and first responders, I do feel like we are definitely behind on that, and we have been for a long time, which as a first responder psychologist, it's frustrating because we know so much about what repeated trauma and threat does to the brain. And we have to share that information, because I always say, individuals in this line of work, you're highly trainable. You guys tend to be very disciplined. And if we give you the skill set, you will practice it and you will get really good at what you do. So why are we leaving off the component of, understanding, skills training when it comes to navigating trauma and threat? That if we give that to you at the front end of it, And yes, I'm talking about the academy. Day one, should really be a foundation there. You guys will do something with that information, or at least, we can feel good that at least you have it. And if you don't do something with it, at least we tried, right? And so that's where I feel like North Texas departments can be better at. But that's why I'm really excited to see what Dallas is doing with something like the OWL Initiative, because you're not just waiting for things to get bad. You're not just sitting around waiting for people to reach out. You are trying to provide information, provide resources, get ahead of it, and that's really refreshing. And I'm excited to see you guys kind of set the bar for others to follow, I hope.
That's the goal. And Chief Ramirez, can you talk about a little bit about how serious is this chief? That man, he gave you this task several months ago. How serious he is about this officer wellness?
Well, I think he's very serious about it. This was a subject that we've talked about for a while now. I think it originally came up at least over 10 months ago. And it was talked about after a series of internal affairs investigations where we continued to see officers coming in for a disciplinary hearing and really talking about, that the discipline hearing was often about 3 different subjects. It was either alcohol related, it was anger related, or there was some sort of really just poor choice in relationship. And we kept seeing those trends. And after several of those hearings, the chief and I talked, and July 7th came up several times in the hearings as just something that the officers were carrying. And so he asked me to do an assessment, to take a look at the state of wellness in the Dallas Police Department. How are we doing as a department? What's provided? What's available to officers? Just an overall of where are we in terms of wellness. And so it was something that he noticed early on. And we set out to do a series of focus groups. Met with commanders, we met with special ops, investigators, patrol officers, and really just asked them, where are you? What kind of, how do you feel the department's supporting you? What is your overall wellness? Where do you gauge yourself? And again, we continued to hear about July 7th. Came up a lot. We continued to hear about struggles and challenges, and just kind of feeling like you're alone, just to kind of plow through. And they had these arbitrary timelines that, when I get out of patrol, it'll be better. Or when I get to investigations, it'll be better. Or when I get to supervisor, it'll be better. When I get to retirement, it'll be better. And, I felt like being the bureau chief over investigations, I supervised a lot of detectives, and I was hearing these same things from detectives. And our focus groups were with supervisors and upper level command as well, and everyone was chasing an arbitrary timeline. So I reported back to the chief, told him that I really don't think we're in a good place. I think there's a lot of things we're carrying. I think there's a lot of hurt still inside this department. And he just immediately said, build something. He says, do what you got to do, but put something together. And so I called in a focus group. We reached out to a few people that I knew were people who cared about this department, people of influence, people of character, and we started mapping this thing out. But anyway, to answer your question, yeah, the chief has absolutely been behind this initiative. He's given us the green light to not only compile a team, conduct our focus groups, but now, as you know, he's authorized a lieutenant, a sergeant, 5 officers, at least to start this thing, and I think there's a lot of momentum, a lot of support for this program coming from the top down. So I think it's got a lot of potential.
With all the focus group and all the data that you received from that, why did you believe a proactive response was needed for this, and how are we going to go about this?
Yeah. So one of our assessments was just kind of looking at what we do offer in the Dallas Police Department, and so we all know that there is a psychological services unit, and we know that if our officers are involved in in a critical incident or an officer-involved shooting, there's a process that's in place that will send our officers, to psychological services, and that's one component. And I think in a large way, I think that they're holding it down and doing that piece. We've also, some of us have heard that there is a new system that the department is implementing that we call early intervention. And what early intervention is it's basically a platform that measures officers against their peers and looks for differences in the amount of vacation time they have, the amount of activity they have, the amount of use of force complaints, and it's looking for people that are outliers as an indicator that there may be someone who is in need. And then if officers flag on that system, they will be part of they'll be offered a seminar that goes on for a series of different timelines. It could be 30 days, 60 days, but it offers resources and other things. That's something that we've had in the department in the past. There's been different modifications of it. There's a new one that's being worked on. I think it's had some success for the people that have completed the program, but I think as a department we look at it very often as punitive. We look at it as something that we're being mandated to do, something that we're kind of being identified, and no one really, I think, at least on the front end, wants it. And so those are the two platforms that we have. Those are the two mechanisms that we have in place in the Dallas Police Department that will get someone to services. But neither of those, I don't think, are broadly looked at favorably. So what we needed to build was something that was incredibly proactive and forward-thinking, something that reached our officers before they were in a crisis, and it needed to be reached at in a manner that supported and or in a manner that our officers would relate to. And this is where our wellness unit, I think, is incredibly unique, and this is where we're going to create some distance and separation in what other departments have done, I believe, because personally I believe, and a lot of my feelings are my own personal feelings, but they were supported by what we learned in these focus groups, and what we learned was that the Dallas Police Department might be the most unique police department in the United States of America as it relates to the need for a full throttle, bell and whistle, robust wellness unit. And the reason is because this department is, we have had, just as recent as July 7th. I mean, we took a sucker punch on July 7th, and it was something that the entire country hadn't seen before. And I think that, in fairness, we really didn't know how to respond to that type of blindsided, shot. And I think when you consider the massive amount of support from not only the country, but even throughout the world that came here to Dallas to help us during this time when we were still probably in shock and pretty stunned, we saw an overwhelming amount of support. We saw we were really in a blur while we buried 5 officers for a couple weeks. It took us to do that, and then we almost immediately. I mean, it was like there were protests still occurring. We were almost we were back to answering calls again, and I think all of us kind of looked and said, well, wait a minute, what do we do here? And so what we did, the one thing that unfortunately we think we've done for 140 years in this police department, and we just buried it. We just rubbed some dirt on it and got back out there and started answering calls again. And I think that all of that is I think it has been, but I think it continues to manifest. And so again, just I give that back context to say that if there is any department in the country that needs a forward-thinking, proactive, all-hands-on-deck approach, it's Dallas PD. So when we look at our wellness unit and we say we are going to be proactive, we're no longer going to wait for an officer to be in a critical incident or for an officer to be in a crisis. I think we've got those areas covered, actually, on the Dallas Police Department, the critical incident and the crisis. We want to get to them before they're in that situation. And we want to take all of these resources that are available out there from, throughout the country, the state, and locally. And we want to serve it up to our officers. We want to make it easy for them. We want to take out all of the searching and the exploring and the research that might need to be done to get to services, and we want to bring it to them. And then we want to take out the financial component of it. We're going to find those resources, and we're going to find funding. And the ATO and the Blue Guardian are two great sources that are right here, in our PD that are already stepping up. And we're gonna make this thing affordable for officers. We're gonna make it available to officers. And then probably the most important key to our initiative and our wellness unit is that we're not going to deliver this from a department standpoint alone. It's not going to come from HR, and it's not going to come from the chief or the command staff. It's going to come from those individual officers within this police department who are, again, people of character, people who have come forward and said, hey, I want to help change this police department. And many of them are carrying, scars of their own. And some of them are in this room. And it's those people who are delivering our message. It's those people who are going to take those resources to our officers. And that's where you see kind of the checkpoint model, and some of the other initiatives that we'll get into. But yeah, ours is it's unique. I think we've put a lot of the focus groups have put a lot into the message. What we're going to relay, who's going to relay that message, and we're gonna make a difference. We're going to impact and reach those officers.
Yeah, it's definitely taking a proactive approach as opposed to just waiting until somebody falls apart. And then it goes back to what Dr. T was talking about of being proactive in an approach to dealing with it. It's not just the July 7th that weigh on people. It's not just an officer-involved shooting. It's the daily grind, the going out and seeing bodies, responding to accidents with mangled bodies, and seeing infant deaths. It's daily. And then what do you have to do? You finish your shift and you go back to work. At least in an officer-involved shooting, you get some days off to somewhat recover, but you're never going to recover fully. And that's when you go see the psych doctors. But again, that's a reaction to an incident, right? And there's a lot of officers that do reach out to the doctors, but I believe a lot of officers need nudges to do it. And I think that's what this proactive approach, putting a bug in their ear that it's okay to come forward. Here's a bunch of resources. You have a bunch of officers that, like you said, are informal leaders within the department. And I believe the command staff that you put forth with Lieutenant Rivera and Figueroa, you said there's some people in the room that are affected by 7-7. Yeah, Omar Figueroa, he dealt with a lot, and we're going to get into that a little bit. We got Sergeant Mosier. He's sitting in. Shout out, Sarge. He had to sit out in front of headquarters for weeks, greeting people coming up to grieve. That weighs on him. Dr. T, what are your thoughts on the best practices starting to peer support, and what do you think what do you think is needed for a strong foundation to get going?
Well, I think something that Chief Ramirez just mentioned that's really important is you need to look around and pay attention to who wants to help. I think when you have an authentic desire to want to help your peers, that's a great opportunity to find individuals like that and seek them out. Whether your selection process is letting people nominate, letting people volunteer, and then the foundation is you need to train them up, right? Because if they are confused about how things show up in their own life, it's going to be hard to help somebody else navigate that, right? And so the same way that, FIRST has its pillars, I encourage every peer support team to have the same type of pillars. And one that I think works well is like this train, check, treat model. And I'm kind of hearing that also as you guys are speaking, where you need to make sure your peer support team is trained up on not only the impact of trauma, right, but then how it shows up. So Chief Ramirez, you mentioned things like alcohol and anger and decision making. A lot of times if we get to the root of that, those things are all secondary to unprocessed trauma or unprocessed pain or the heavy load of what they've been carrying for years because they didn't know how to access it and nobody told them what to do with it, and now it just shows up in these unhelpful ways. So not just the trauma piece, but how to ground yourself when your nervous system's acting up and you feel anxious at the grocery store. How to fight fairly when you are emotionally charged and saying things you don't really mean because your limbic system has gotten so good at what it does. Things like that, we almost forget to include the skills training of how to just be a functioning human who has to deal with this oncoming of constant stress and pain that most human beings will never understand because they don't have to have that front row seat. So making sure the training is so solid so that when your peer member is interacting with another person, they're hearing things that don't throw them or don't be like, oh crap, that happens to me too and I don't even know what to do with it. But they're like, hey, let me normalize this for you. Let me speak the language, but then let me also give you some evidence-based techniques, things you can do in the moment, things that we offer. That's the training piece. Then that helps the check piece kind of almost be more natural, where now that we've given you that front piece as a peer member, like I'm just going to check in on you. Like, how are you using those skills? What makes those skills hard to implement? How are you doing with it? How's your family doing with it? And then if, after we've trained them, after you're checking on them, then that's where the peer member can step in and help with now treatment. So again, it's this train, check, treat. Don't try and say it too fast, but train, check, treat, and then the treatment part. Because if we're just going after treatment, now we're slipping away from that proactive piece, which is not what peer members want. They want to get ahead of it. But then also knowing your resources, knowing what's available, that if someone does get to the treatment piece of it, you guys know exactly where to take them. You have that contact in place, and get to know your local ERs. If you have someone in crisis and you're bringing them in, you should have a contact at that hospital. So your officer's not ending up sitting in the same room that, someone who's having, a meth psychotic break going on, that's not going to help. That's going to deter them to ask for help again. So it should be a private room. It should be separate. And you should have someone at that hospital staff who's trained up a little bit on this culture, so that they know how to navigate that as smoothly as possible for the officer. So just things like that. I think it's where peer members have to think a little bit outside the box, of each of those columns. Okay, if this shows up, how are we going to help? What are the potential roadblocks? And then what are the solutions for those roadblocks? And that's where peer members, get ahead of it. And that's going to help your peer, when you do reach out or they do reach out, it's going to help them have a positive experience.
Well, that's one thing. That's part of the training piece, right? Is getting to know, that's something we're writing down notes over here, is getting to know the context at your local ERs, and that's important. We just recently had to do a lot of audibles on of handling an individual, and we weren't prepared, but we had to just do it on the fly, and now we know. But again, that's a learning experience. But again, for the training to be proactive and have the protocol in place to be proactive, that's getting, that's us reaching out beforehand and trying to think of plan B, C, and D, and E if needed, right?
Yeah. If I could also say one more thing, as a peer team, make sure that you are tracking every month the type of interactions that you have. You keep everything de-identified and confidential, but if, let's say, you have a peer member and in the month of September, 80% of their contacts had to do with alcohol, right? And now all of a sudden you're seeing this trend. You have to build the trainings around what your department actually needs, right? We have to actually tailor it. So if you come back and say, gosh, we are just getting so many alcohol contacts, then that helps us understand, okay, for the next quarter, maybe we should get some alcohol trainings going. Or maybe we should do like a couples workshop and we focus on the impact of substance on this type of work. And so that way it's individualized, it's tailored, and it's a needs assessment for what your people need, rather than this, we think this is what they need. As peer members who have an insight into it, there's a lot of good you can do with that information.
Yeah, it's just constantly gathering data from the basically you're right from the horse's mouth, right? The peer supporters and the checkpoint folks are going to be constantly reaching out to people. We're going to get into our wellness checkpoints in a bit. Any kind of program we start, or any program that start across the country, it's not a one size fits all, right? We're a huge department, and we're not as big as we once were, but we're getting there. Chief, we kind of modeled this after San Diego. Their wellness unit has been around for like 11 or 12 years, and across the country it's looked at in the law enforcement world is kind of a standard. What can you talk about that?
Sure. So yeah, San Diego really they were just leading the pack, and as it relates to the all hands on deck approach as to wellness, and that's probably one of the things that we that caught our attention the most is that they have 100+ peer supporters, and they are looking forward thinking, proactively looking for those opportunities to reach their officers through an empathy, compassion, support model. They're looking forward, not waiting for a crisis. So that was a piece that caught our attention, and we did mirror some of their approaches. They were helpful enough to send us their SOP, send us some of their models. Their officers have connected with our wellness unit team, and they continue to be in communication. But I think the part about San Diego that caught our attention was that it was an all hands on deck approach. And again, when we look at Dallas PD, I can't think of another city that has those types of that has the history that we've had in DPD, from a crisis, from a major incident, a city that has at least a top 4 media market, the scrutiny that our officers are under in a city like this, day in and day out, I think plays a role in some of the stressors and the things that they carry. So we needed something that was big, and we took bits and pieces of theirs and to start to create ours. One other piece that I think we noticed in Dallas PD through our focus groups was really what we call the culture. For one, was not very receptive to the idea of wellness, the idea of therapy, the idea of counseling, and really just the discussion. And that, I think that's something that is really big for other departments that are looking to build a wellness unit, to understand what your culture is. And we have a very hardened culture here to the idea, the concept of wellness. So that requires us to have a different approach. We can't, if we got an influx of $1 million to buy a piece of technology for wellness, or hired a dozen more doctors, but the department isn't receptive to the idea of it, to the discussion of it, then I think it has less an opportunity to get where we need it to get to. So the majority, it's another reason why the majority of our focus is on what we call almost tilling the earth, trying to reach out to officers, to through those people of influence, and have these discussions and aim to normalize the topic and discussion of wellness, and through our own personal stories and our own challenges and the things we've carried, share our battle with some of these challenges and and some of the therapy we've utilized to try to normalize that discussion and help officers see the real value in it. And then I think only then can we really start to get some of the science, the research, the therapy, and the help that's out there to those officers, and get them to embrace it, and hopefully share it with their families. It's another piece of this that we haven't touched on yet, that I'm sure we will, but we have neglected in policing, at least in the Dallas Police Department, the importance of the family and as it relates to wellness. And we if you're an officer and you're carrying things, for the most part, I think we hire so well that officers can handle a lot of it. But sometimes it's when your family life starts to unravel, and when you have a sick family member, or God forbid a death in the family, or even a divorce, and when those things start to unravel, that's when I think our officers get into these crisis modes, and we haven't done enough to protect the families. So anyway, that's part of this group's initiative and focus as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And Dr. T, you have a big focus on you do a lot of spouse workshops, right?
Yes, I think that couples workshops are so critical. And I will tell you, one of the number one things when I do department-wide, like resiliency training, one of the number one things I have afterwards is always someone comes up and says, my wife needs to hear that. Almost like this, I've tried to explain it to her, or we don't know what's happening, because again, there's these highs when I'm at work and then the lows hit, and that's purely a physiological recovery period that's happening. But if I don't know what's happening and I can't explain it to him or her, and she doesn't know what's happening or he doesn't know what's happening, it leaves giant question marks for a family. And I'll tell you what happens with question marks. We fill them with assumptions. And it's really sad to hear some of the assumptions family members and the first responder comes up with, when we could have gotten ahead of that. That's such unnecessary suffering we're adding, because maybe now the spouse is, well, gosh, maybe it's me, or the first responder's like, maybe I'm losing my mind, maybe I'm not fit to do this. And those thoughts, your body does something with that. That's just more stress, just more pain for you to carry. And so we have to get rid of the question marks, inform them, and then give them like things they can actually start doing today together to navigate it, because trauma has a fun way of creating wedges in relationships. And so it's almost like you got to prepare them for the battle so that they can get through it together, and that will bring them closer. People get closer when they go through hard things, and that includes the couples.
Well, they have to be, because they go home and they're the closest to that person. And, we have Keelan Mikata sitting here, and she's married to a Dallas officer, and she sees both, her and her wife see both dynamics of this profession, right? And they moved, sold a house, newly promoted, new job. So there's a lot going on. And, your spouse is supposed to be your pillar, right? And when we go through these traumatic incidents, or it doesn't have to be that traumatic, it could be a daily job, and you go home, and if your pillar starts to crumble, everything's going to crumble, right? Doc, can you briefly talk about the physiological effects from a traumatic incident?
Absolutely. So when you think of what the brain is being exposed to when you are having that front row seat to something really traumatic, it's going to show up for you. It's not something you decide. The limbic system is very quick, and it's designed to call you to action. And in order to do that, in order to plunge you into that, certain chemicals, hormones, proteins have to be released, right? And that's our fight or flight. That's the sympathetic nervous system, and it allows you to be really good at what you do. But there's a consequence to the stress response, right? The benefits are, again, it helps you do what you need to do very efficiently, but then what goes up must come down, and it's like a seesaw. So the sympathetic is when you're up, fight or flight. Parasympathetic is when you're recovering, right? And that's your rest and digest. Well, what goes up must come down. So the higher you go, like a critical incident, we know this low is coming. And it's not because something's wrong with you. It's because the body's now physically recovering from the dump that just happened. There's things you can do to make that dump worse, like pouring alcohol on it, or a bunch of coffee, or isolating yourself, or going home and just getting it jacked back up by video games, or things like that, where people don't realize, your brain is doing something with every experience, right? We're in that recovery to help that dip come up quicker. We need things like how your breathing matters, quickest way to communicate with your nervous system. So after that incident, you better be moving that diaphragm on your drive home, pull into that driveway, taking those deep breaths. You're calming the limbic system down. And the reason that's important is not just physiologically. We need your heart rate to chill out. We need your blood pressure to come down, just for the health reasons. But when you're in that mode, the prefrontal, which is the thinking part of the brain, it's going offline, right? So if you are still very limbic, there's a chance that you're not going to be real rational when you get home, and that's where that short temper comes in. And one of the things that I mentioned that gets dumped in the system, we don't always hear about it. You guys hear about adrenaline and cortisol. You don't always hear about something called tachykinin, and it's a protein. And the way that it binds to the brain, the two primary ways it shows up, and this is what gets released during the stress response, primary two ways it shows up is anxiety and irritability. So after a critical incident, you're supposed to feel those things. But if you're highly critical of yourself, or maybe you have a critical spouse, or at the root of that, you both are just not informed of what the response is, now we're poking at the manifestation of the trauma rather than seeking to understand what could we do to just help the trauma, because it's here, it happened. Maybe we take a walk. Maybe you just need 30 minutes when you get home. Maybe excuse me, we need to drink some water instead of wine tonight. It's making these little decisions that can have a big impact, not only on that critical incident, but just the longevity of every time there's an incident, whether you feel okay or not, your body still just took a beating. It still just took a demand, and you have to help it. That's how you're going to get through this and come out on the other side with a working liver, blood pressure that's still in a nice range, hopefully the first marriage. That's how we're going to get there.
Doc, thank you. I want to get your thoughts on being culturally competent as a therapist for officers. Can you explain why that's so important?
Well, it's so important because, like Chief mentioned, this job is unlike any other. And I might be biased because, yes, I'm a first responder psychologist and family member, but I truly feel this is the toughest job on the planet. And what we ask of you guys over and over and over again, unless you understand that culture, you can't just have a good trauma background. That definitely helps. And I'm not saying that a trauma therapist can't help a first responder, but if you are a trauma therapist who's wanting to get into this culture, do some ride-alongs. Sit down with some tenured folks. Let them share some stories. Understand that this is more than just a job. This is an experience that is going to change everything about how they function, how they relate to others, how they see themselves, how they're able to connect. Trauma's at the root of it. So if you don't have the cultural competence, again, it's kind of like we talked about that hospital situation, at the ER. We have this brief window of an opportunity to get the buy-in. If a first responder is going to say, okay, I'm finally willing to ask for help, chances are they're probably way past where they needed to be. They're like barely hanging on. If you have that window and like, okay, here we go, and you sit them in front of a therapist who is going to ask more questions about their shift work or cry when they share the story, not saying that therapists can't have human emotions, that's healthy, but if you have that and that's one of their first experiences, what do you think that first responder is going to walk away with? Are they going to be confident that, hey, I think I can see some light at the end of the tunnel? Or are they going to walk away with one more evidence that, see, nobody gets it, I have to do this alone, I told you what happens when bad things show up, and I share it, so they're going to walk away and possibly learn, keep my mouth shut, carry it by myself, rub some dirt on it. We're just basically sending the very message that every peer team is wanting to work against and every department is wanting to work against, and that's that stigma.
Well, yeah, if an officer comes away from the initial contact with somebody that they're full of shit, they don't understand me, they don't understand my job, I'm not going to go back to that person. And it may just turn them off of total getting help from anywhere, right? Chief, I want to get into the kind of responses Dallas PD have. What response do we have as a department?
Well, so when we were building this program, the focus group, we wanted to understand in our efforts to normalize the discussion of wellness, we had to see what were the things that were being normalized that shouldn't have been. And so we started researching the CAD system and kind of taking a look at the amount of officers that respond to certain calls and what type of calls. So we took these three categories. We took homicides, fatality crashes, and suicides. And we know that on average, we respond to 230 homicides a year, around 200 fatality crashes a year, 100 suicides a year. And to each one of those responses, you have about 5 to 10 officers that will respond, depending on the scene. That's not counting the 7,000 ag assaults a year. It's not counting the hundreds of child abuse cases that officers respond to, the sex assaults. It's not counting the deadly force or confrontations that our officers are involved in. So when we talk about trauma, the numbers that we're producing in the Dallas Police Department on a daily, weekly, yearly basis are off the charts, and we dismiss about 99% of those calls as just part of the job. Everything the doctor was just saying. We just, an officer can't go to the scene of a fatality and really, I think, comfortably come forward and say, hey, I'm having a tough time with this. Because that here in the Dallas PD and probably in most PDs, that's considered part of the job. Matter of fact, we still have trainers that are answering for calls when they're training a rookie saying, hey, I'll take that signal 27 or that dead body for training purposes. I mean, we're just overly exposing and even often unnecessarily exposing our officers to trauma and really not equipping them or assessing whether they're equipped to be able to handle it, whether they have the tools or techniques or what their strategy is to handle it. And these are where these cultures kick in, where we basically just say, rub some dirt on it, bury it, or let's go get a drink. And these are the things that are contributing to our stigmas. And I mean, I almost feel like, I don't want to go too far on a tangent here, but when we talk about some of the research, the medical research that's out there, and that says, hey, there's policing is very stressful. We have these very high suicide rate, if not the highest suicide rate, very high drug addiction. Obviously, alcohol has been the that's been our poison. Divorce. I mean, we're averaging 70% in Dallas PD. It's even been up to 75% divorce rate. These have got to be symptoms to a bigger problem, but yet we continue to operate as if that's just part of the job, and it can't be any longer. And so, these are the things that we're identifying. And I know a lot of Dallas police officers who are listening to this, they've already had someone reach out just for these calls that were previously looked at as normal. We're no longer going to look at it just like it's just a normal part of the job, and you got to be able to deal with it. We're going to check on people, and we're going to let them know we're there. So, a lot of trauma that we're exposed to. It's just a lot that I think needs to be brought to the forefront.
It's a cumulative effect, right? I mean, you could respond to 10 fatality accidents or 10 homicides or 5 foot chases within a week's time. It's that next one that may get you. It's that next infant. I talked to one of the PES, it's physical evidence section for the non-police here listening, that he was talking about processing an infant that had been murdered and basically beaten to death, and the infant was wearing the same diapers that his baby wore. I mean, that was like 12 years ago, and he still was teary-eyed telling me about that. That's hanging over that man's head, and it will forever, right? Okay, I want to get into the formation of this unit. This is unlike other units because usually the hierarchy goes that you have a police and senior corporal, and you have a sergeant that's the direct supervisor, then you have a lieutenant, and then it goes to major, and then it goes to a deputy chief, and then it goes to a 2-star chief. That's what you are. And then we have a 3-star, and then it goes up to the big boss. This pretty much goes directly from lieutenant straight to the top. It goes to the 2-star chief, right?
That's right. That's one of the things that we wanted to make sure that our unit, based on the feedback we got from our officers, we did hear that, hey, there's a lack of trust for command. We did hear that. We don't trust coming forward to HR or personnel or even psych services out of fear that they will have some sort of responsibility to tell the chief or tell the department what it is they share, which is absolutely not true. But nonetheless, these are the concerns of our department. These are the things that we learned. So we wanted to make concessions in our unit for those things, and so we created this unit and we siloed it out, separate from personnel, separate from psych services, and really removed as many layers of supervision or chain of command as we could. It's going to have a unit commander, a Lieutenant Rivera, and she will report directly to the Office of the Chief of Police. Now it will be to me. It has me connected to it, but she will have the opportunity to report directly to the chief himself on things that the chief needs to know or authorization for different fundings, different types of approaches and strategies to our wellness unit based on what she's seeing. She can get that authorization directly from the boss.
And that means a lot because it cuts out the middle women and men, right? And within those middle women and men, you have different levels of leadership, philosophies, opinions, right? So if we make the command a lot more, it's more of a straight shot as opposed to a bunch of waiting at different levels, right? And you may have different spins put on something. By the time it gets to the top, the message gets to the top, it could be different from how it started, right? And this cuts out all these layers. So you got Lieutenant Rivera to be the lieutenant. Lieutenant, can you tell the listener a little about yourself, why you jumped on this chance to lead this brand new start from scratch unit, which is hard to do in any department? Can you tell us what this means to you and why you're doing it?
I have been in the department for 22 years now. I have been very fortunate to have had the opportunity to be in different departments. I started off at Northeast Patrol. I went to the child abuse unit. I was there for 6 years. I've had the opportunity to work at the city manager's office, internal affairs, back to patrol, and now here. I was given this opportunity back in June, and I was caught off guard. It is something that I had not heard of, but hearing Chief Ramirez speak about what the goals were and the intent behind it, I was very excited. I was very hopeful. I understand the need that officers have, being that, when I was in child abuse, I saw a lot of things that, to this day still affect me. They don't have the same energy. So I know that there's officers out there that are still struggling with things. So having this opportunity to be able to not just provide the resources, but to normalize a conversation that it is okay to speak to a peer supporter. It is okay to speak to a therapist. It's a very exciting opportunity for me.
It's a lot of work, right? I'm seeing there's a lot of learning, as Dee Dee likes to put it, flying a plane as we're building it, right?
That's exactly what it's been like for these past couple of weeks.
A lot of stress, a lot of lack of sleep, a lot of frustration, but yeah, we're gonna make it happen. Sergeant Figueroa.
Yes, sir.
So tell the listener who you are and how you got involved with this and why it's important to you.
Okay, my name is Omar Figueroa. I got involved with the wellness unit. Actually, I saw the job come out, the post for the job come out, and I thought to myself, wow, that's interesting, but I never really pictured myself in this role until I actually got a phone call from you, Joe, and you asked me to consider it and to apply for the position. And I kind of brushed you off at first, and I was like, yeah, it sounds great, but I just don't picture myself in the position. But the more I thought about it and all the experiences I've been through, and seeing other officers suffer and, similar experiences as my own, I started really considering it, and I applied. I applied for the position. I interviewed. Basically, right before the interview, I had an interaction with an employee just before walking into the interview, and I had a kind of a checkpoint, and I realized, man, this role is very important, and so I did my best in the interview, and I think I did well. I got the job. So yeah. I've been on the department. Next month will be 14 years. I started out at Northwest, then I went to several special assignments, ended up at CBD, bid for Northeast when the Metro Task Force was formed, and I was handpicked to come into the Metro Task Force, so I never made it to Northeast. Metro Task Force over the years ended up morphing into the fugitive unit, so I spent 10 years there. Promoted about a year and a couple months ago, and one day in detail after a critical incident at Southeast, where I was a sergeant, I realized that my officers were all rookies, and that, it was a shooting, and like 10 people were shot, and there was one fatality. Down
in Deep Ellum? Is that it?
No, this one was Botham John.
Okay, yep.
And, this was one of those calls where I thought to myself, oh, here we go, another one, right? Another major incident. But after, the sun came up and I went home and I slept on it, and I'm always thinking about my troops, right? I kind of picture them as my kids, right? And trying to guide them and provide, just help and help them out in any way I can. So I started thinking, this is their first incident. How are they handling this? How how can I help them? So next day in detail, I after we did roll call and everything, I brought it up. I said, hey, we just had this major incident. I understand that for a lot of you, this is the first time that, something like that, you experienced something like this. You all handled yourselves well, did a great job, gave a couple commendations and everything. But I told them, look, this is not something that the normal average person, goes through. And this is part of your job. But at the same time, it's okay not to be okay. And if you need to reach out, you need to talk to somebody, you need to come talk to me. I had an open door policy. I talked to everybody. And the response I got from that was pretty surprising. I noticed some jaws dropping in the detail. And I said, man, I'm, really getting to them. And then other officers just started, sharing their experiences. And it turned into a kind of a little group therapy session, right? And I think that's what got back to you, Joe, and that's why you reached out to me and asked me to apply for this position.
Yeah, well, whenever the selection process was going on, I didn't know who all applied. I knew that, and I had talked with Chief Ramirez before, because I was doing a half foot and legal and half foot just kind of helping out when I could of throwing out some ideas. But I was like, if I want to be a part of this, I want somebody that's a strong leader, somebody that's looked up to. I think that goes further with the troops. But so when the Detective Mikado over there told me about you getting up in front of detail and just saying that, nobody told you to do that, right? You just you got up and you did it. You felt that you saw a need that was important to you. And it is, and we want to normalize a conversation. We want to normalize that it's okay to talk about. That's why on this podcast I like to get, anybody that listens, they know that we talk about some really, really critical incidents and some bad things. And I've seen people that's got, multiple awards for Medal of Valor break down telling a story of being there when an officer got killed. I've had officers shout out Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that reach out and say, hey, I heard people, the way they responded in a situation all the way from, many states away, they feel that because of what they heard, it helped them react better. It's surprising. When people hear other people are going through certain things and they're going through trauma and they're dealing with it or they're not dealing with it, I think that can resonate, and I believe it does resonate with other officers, peers, and also civilians that don't understand us as well. Chief talked about 7/7, and there's a lot of casualties from 7/7 that were actually there and people that were not there, right? And that's just a ripple effect through this whole city and in the country, really. Can you talk about, a little bit about what you experienced?
Sure. We were assigned just outside of downtown. Chief Brown had us sitting at a high crime area just to be seen is basically the instructions that we were given. So we sat at the corner in the marked squad car, me and my partner, Miles Sheeran, when all of a sudden all hell broke loose and citywide assist, multiple officers down. That's what was, put out over the radio. Seemed to me like it took me a minute to get to the location to the El Centro College. And when I turned in front of the street in front of El Centro, I saw squad cars in the intersection. And my partner, Milo, he says, stop the car. I see someone down right here in front of the doors of El Centro. So unbeknownst to me, later I found out through video I watched on YouTube that I parked right in front of the shooter's vehicle. The person that was down when we ran over there was Officer Brent Thompson from Dart PD. Milo jumped into, trying to save his life, and started, lifted his shirt and trying to plug holes, whatever he saw with his fingers. I popped the trunk, retrieved my rifle, and when I look over the trunk, I see officers in the intersection that were ducking behind their cars yelling at me, "Get out of there, get out of there. He's right there," referring to the shooter. So I immediately, turned around and, head on the swivel while Milo was trying to treat Brent. And, I didn't see the shooter, but I saw, bullet holes in the glass, in the pillar. And obviously Brent was down right there, and Milo says, "Hey, get the car." So I ran back to the car, reversed it a little bit more, and then by that time my old partner in fugitive unit, Joe Lopez, who's now in SWAT, him and Milo were putting Brent in the car, and I kind of froze for a second as I was, you put it in reverse and you look back, and I'm seeing this scene of Brent and the extent of his injuries. I basically knew he wasn't going to survive. And I kind of froze there for a minute, and Sergeant from CBD just tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, get out." And so I jumped out of the car and kind of snapped back into it, and then it turned into, let's hunt this guy down. Let's find where the hell he is. Milo and I on that video I watched on YouTube, you can hear us on the radio saying that the shooter is now inside the El Centro College, just so, because there were different reports that he was in a parking garage, that it was more than one shooter, that, this, that, and the other. But we knew he had gone into the El Centro College. And so Joe, Milo, and I all went in. And in that video, just so you realize how close I was, or we were to the shooter, he was actually around the corner applying tourniquets when we rolled up, because Officer Brent Thompson saved our lives that day. He put effective rounds on him, and this guy came prepared. He had tourniquets pre-applied, and he just tightened them up on each arm while we were dealing with Brent. So when we went into the building, it was pure chaos. There were people just everywhere pointing different directions, saying he's in there, no, he's over there. And so unfortunately, Milo and I got separated. Joe went around the other side, and he actually found a blood trail from the shooter. And Joe followed it upstairs. I went up a different stairwell, and I heard more shots. I was headed over in that direction, and I found out later Joe had caught up to the shooter, and he he engaged the shooter with his 9mm, because he didn't have a chance to grab his rifle. And then more SWAT officers started showing up, and as I was heading toward the direction of the gunfire, a SWAT officer came around the corner and startled me, and he said, no, stay right there in case he doubles back and comes through the library. It's all glass right there. I don't know what the layout is on the other side, so if he makes it around this side, you got him. He's all yours. So I did that and held there until more and more SWAT officers came. Channel 5 sergeant actually was glued to my backside and grabbing my belt and just had my back the whole time, and he didn't let go of me, it just let me know that he was there. And so no one would come up behind me and try to ambush me that way. Once more SWAT personnel came, they started pushing us out so they can control the entire floor. And so then I said, okay, what else? There's students still in this building. Let's start clearing the building out. I don't know how many floors that is, but going up and down those stairs with all the gear and the rifle and getting students out of, searching and getting students out of classrooms and evacuating them from the building, I had spaghetti legs once the night was done. But It was a big relief once Chief Brown gave the order to take them out, and once you felt that explosion, it was just a big relief, like we could breathe again, and no, it was a really tough night.
You know, it's an anatomy of a traumatic event, right, Doc? I mean, it's this event for Dallas, we didn't even talk about the shooter that attacked headquarters, right? That's kind of forgotten because of what happened the following year in the 7/7. This city is a magnet for traumatic events, and the officers that are affected. And that's one reason, Omar, that I know you, and I know what people think of you, right? And your actions that night, you're kind of one of those officers that, like Baines, keeping glass box and break in case of emergency, right? You act and you perform well, and people look up to you, and your leadership is because of how you react and your message that you're speaking from real life experiences, right? And, I thank you for sharing that. When I started this podcast, it basically was because of Dr. T's class, the 3-day course, and we got one coming up in October. And she had a panel of 10 first responders talking about their incidents. Talking about, it doesn't have to be critical incidents. Not everybody's going to have a 7/7 story like Sarge does. They're going to have bouts with alcoholism, bouts with destroying their home life and marriages, and 1 or 2, 3 divorces, right? And a lot of it's the constant trauma that this job pours on us. It's like concrete on our shoulders. It just keeps coming. It doesn't stop. Even if you promote, you're going to go when you get off the streets, you're going to become a detective. Go to homicide, or go to capers, go to robbery. You're going to see violence every day. You're going to have to watch body cam videos. You're going to be watching, it's like watching a nonstop horror movie of violence, right?
Absolutely.
It's like watching a Saw movie on repeat. I want to get into the model for the OWL, the wellness unit. Education, I have a survey, the newsletter, which is the OWL, and I want to get into the wellness checkpoints. Doc, you got something you want to dive in on?
Yeah, I just wanted to, same thing, Omar, thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to come back to using that story, and then, Joe, like you mentioned, the stories of others and why we highlight it at the 3-day is there's no way around it. Like, pain is a part of this job, and pain is a part of this life. And when we are in it, we do the best we can. And your training kicks in and your conditioning kicks in. But one thing that I think is so beautiful about peer teams and about what Dallas is doing, because Dallas, Chief, like you mentioned, has endured a lot of pain, and unfortunately there's more pain ahead, is when you can acknowledge the pain, slow down enough to acknowledge it. Because sometimes, like, we just bulldoze, and you guys just bulldoze. Like, this call happens, and then, like you said, those numbers are horrific. Like, now the next call's coming, and like we just keep going. That when we slow down enough, you can acknowledge maybe what you needed. And that's the beautiful thing about peer members is you can say, well, gosh, when I endured this type of pain, I didn't have this in place, or no one said this to me, or no one told me this was normal. And that's one of the things that peer members can do is they can use their pain and use those really tough moments to teach them something, to that they can then provide that. What they didn't get, they can provide it to somebody else. And when you share stories like that, and hearing, obviously how well respected you are, to then also use that to show vulnerability the way that you did with those team members of yours, that's how your pain now gets to do good. And I'm just really appreciative of a team like this. Any peer team members out there, that's what this is about. It's not sugarcoating it, it's sitting with it, but then actually doing something with it.
As opposed to just not doing anything and just that's what you signed up for, right? Nobody signed up to get ambushed while they're out protecting people. That's basically protesting against them. That's part of America. You can peacefully protest, right? I want to get into the education piece. The education piece for the wellness unit it's still in the works. There's a lot of plans, Chief. We're going to have rookies, right? You talk about tilling the earth. The soil is the rookies, right? They're the ones just coming into this profession. They kind of know what they're getting into, but they really don't. And to get them educated and get them influenced, more importantly, and have normalize this the overall wellness, whether it's emotional, financial, physical, spiritual, for a lot of folks. You got to normalize that conversation to understand when people hear, respected troops like Omar and many others tell their stories of their experience, and also they were greatly affected by it. I think getting in at the rookies and on the ground level of this department, and because that did not go on when we hired on, Chief. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. They're the future of our department. We've got to assess where we have maybe improperly prepared our previous generations and make sure that we're equipping these officers with the right information, the right mindset. The till-in does need to occur throughout the entire department too. And I think one of those first steps is, we talk about resilience often, but I think one of the things that we never really talk about is that while, yes, there may be different resilient levels or within an individual officer, it's also a moving scale. You can be incredibly resilient, and then and if the bottom falls out of it at home, with some of those other things that we've mentioned, whether it's a divorce or a sick family member, a sick child, your resilience level or your ability to be resilient tanks, and so this is one of the. This is where we missed in policing. It's not a matter of how gritty you are or how tough you are. There are things that are going to happen in your life that are going to affect your ability to be exposed to the violence that we're exposed to, or be able to operate at an extremely high level in a critical incident. I mean, yes, there's value in the training and the mindset and the muscle memory, but it is a moving scale, and then that's the human part of this job that has been left out of the equation for far too long, and it's not going to be left out of our model. The education piece has to be on all fronts. It's got to be at the academy. It's got to be at in-service. It's got to be at FTO school, sergeant school, and it's got to come from different people. They don't need to hear it from the academy staff. They don't need to only hear it from command staff. They've got to hear it from everyone. Again, it's an all hands on deck, all front, multifaceted approach. And but the education piece is going to be key in our efforts to normalize.
Yeah, and we've also discussed too about setting up eventually like mandatory debriefs for rookies after each phase of training, because each phase they learn something different and have different experiences, just to check on them. And we also we're looking into the family approach to having a family night, and because the family, the support, that's the main support structure, right? You're going to have your peers and your coworkers and your friends here, but when you go home and you have to deal with kids, girlfriend, wife, or whatever, that has to be strong and stable. The education is going to be the biggest piece, and that's another proactive approach, right? Because I remember when I went through in 97, it was barely touched on. It was almost like a couple-hour block, and it wasn't talked about again. And then when I went through training at Southeast, it was never talked about. Nobody talked about it. A 4,500 badge was my first and fourth phase trainer. He was not talking about wellness, okay? We had a survey we sent out to the department, and just like any survey, it's on average like 35 or less % of an organization will actually respond to a survey. Yeah. So you're getting data from only the type of people that take a survey, but you could still get valuable data in that. And I think we have. We haven't totally combed through it all, but some common things that I noticed were people talking about finances, also anxiety, lack of sleep. There was a lot of spiritual pieces. Some officers, there's a lot of things they talked about. We kept seeing the 10-hour shift come up, and that's being looked at different fronts, and that's not our unit's not looking at that, but the department is. But there's all these little nuggets, I believe, that we got from feedback from officers that we can delve into and see what we can do about it. the financial piece, we're going to get into that because there's a lot of officers that get right out of the academy. They go and buy a kick-ass Raptor truck, and they're paying $800 a month, and they're living paycheck to paycheck, and working extra jobs 4 or 5 days a week, which adds more stress and more exhaustion on top of the normal day-to-day police shift. So that's some components we're going to have to really look into. And that was, hopefully when we do the next surveys, we're going to have more response. And, we want to listen to this feedback, because this feedback are the people that are on the ground shouting up, screaming, they need help in their own way, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And, you brought up something interesting, though, that when we look at, just to illustrate how in depth we're looking at our model and what we need to do, yes, the surveys are incredibly important. We did get a lot of responses regarding more support from the department. We got a response about wanting debriefs after critical incidents. I thought that was interesting. Nutrition came up a lot, and so these are things that are really, these are important. And moving forward, I think we're going to have a lot higher turnout on our once we prove that we're going to respond to them with something. I think the department will see that how valuable that piece is. But I want to share this one story. This was part of during our quest to map out this unit. We looked at some vendors for a piece of technology to overlay on our wellness unit, something that would connect officers and sworn and non-sworn to services, to whether it's peer support or counseling or telehelp, teletherapy. And one of the vendors we met with is a company that was built off of, I'll tell you, the company's name is ProTeam, and they're built, ex-professional athletes are building this platform. And it's a really good platform. It's something that we're looking at and considering. But what was most fascinating about this vendor was that they were professional athletes who were building this resiliency platform. And I asked them why. I said, why do professional athletes see the need for this? And he said, because we're seeing more and more increases in professional sports of people who are turning to alcohol, drug abuse. We're seeing suicides, and we're seeing divorce rates, and really just dependency on substance and these other things, which is obviously not very, it's fairly similar to what we're seeing. And so I said, interesting. I said, can you tell me why? Why are professional athletes experiencing this more often? Here's what his response was. He said, it is because when you are a professional athlete, from the moment you become a professional athlete, he said, if you are first string, then second string is breathing down your neck, waiting for you to make a mistake, trying to take your spot. If you're second string, third string's doing it. He goes, and then on. He goes, fourth string, the scout team's looking at your spot. He goes, you're being judged by coaches, you're being judged by fans, by the media. There's this constant scrutiny and pressure on you that type of pressure is impacting our athletes' ability to operate at the level that we expect. So you think about that, and then you kind of put that over the side and think about what it is we're doing to our police officers in this country, right? There's a increased pressure on them in a number of different ways, but they're scrutinized constantly. They're wearing body cams and dash cams. The media is videoing them. Citizens are videoing them on every call. There's policies and pressures and stressors that are piled on them, right? But then you compare those two models, right? And you say, okay, well, I can see the similarities in what he's describing and those pressures and those stressors. But then you look at the professional athlete and you say, wow, we've been telling our police officers, you need to have a good diet, good nutrition balance. Those athletes have probably the best diet and nutrition balance on the planet. And we say stuff to them like, make sure you exercise. There's nobody exercising more than they are. We say things like, you got to maintain your finances because that's what's causing a lot of this. They don't have problems with finances usually on the professional athlete side. So why is it that they have all the things that we're teaching our police officers to have, but yet they are still having these challenges and developing these mental illnesses and these stigmas, right? And I think it's a lot of what we've discussed here. We've got to look at this differently. These are not cookie cutter responses. Everyone is unique. Everyone is carrying their own burdens. Our resilience levels fluctuate and shift. And so what I think we're building, again, in Dallas PD that is so unique and is going to make a difference is that this model is completely built off of empathy, compassion, and support. This is a forward-thinking, a proactive initiative that is going to layer our police officers with empathy and compassion and support, and it's not coming from HR. It's not coming from any separate bureau. It's coming from these people in this department. I mean, well, first of all, because you're one of them. Our checkpoint officers are, you find me a police department that has the team of SWAT operators on their peer support, proactive wellness initiative. Okay, we've got a lot of them. We've got SWAT negotiators, we've got operators, we've got helicopter pilots, we've got SWAT, or homicide detectives, child abuse detectives, some real players from patrol. I mean, there's guys and gals that are just at a different level. These are the people that are coming forward and saying, hey, we want to be part of this initiative. We're not putting out a cattle call and saying, hey, come forward if you want to. They're being referred by the people that we've already identified who are checkpoint officers. And again, it's unique, but it's got all of us, and everybody who actually sees the model, thinking that we've got a lot of potential here. So it's some good stuff for sure.
Absolutely. Doc, you want to weigh in on this?
Well, yeah, I love the approach of viewing first responders as athletes, because they are. And I think one of the interesting things is when you talk about what these, professional athletes have surrounding them, like usually this really great team of experts when it comes to like nutrition and recovery and their PT, and they're ready to work them. Yet they still end up with some of these issues. I think this is where we can again learn and have this really good, both a top-down and then a bottom-up approach. So when I say that, what I mean is if you have the healthiest lifestyle, but what's going on in your head is not just, yes, the trauma rattles people, but how you talk to yourself, how critical you are. When you walk away from any situation in your life, like what do you actually do with it? What do you tell yourself as to why? We've got to make sure that there's awareness of your body's listening. And when you have even one negative thought about yourself, there is a consequence to that, and then your body carries it. So you have to make sure this top-down approach is there of focusing on that. But then the bottom-up approach, when you think of an athlete, if they get injured and all the pressure you just described, they're out, right? And when you think of a first responder, one of the biggest threats to all of you is that vessel of yours going out on you, right? And working with first responders, as long as I have, I will tell you many of them say that going out on an injury is some of the darkest days of their life, because they give and they give and they give everything to this job, and eventually their body, whether they have the mental grit to carry them through, your body's going to show up in some way. Next thing you know, you have an injury, and the next thing you know, you're out. And the next thing you know, your nervous system that is used to go, 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 go is now sitting. And then now all of a sudden, where's my purpose? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? And then the head gets into a really dark place. And then let's throw some painkillers and alcohol on top of it, right? So when we talk about that proactive piece, the physical demands of what this job does, because sometimes obviously we know the mental demands, right? But the physical demands, we have to be ahead of that as well. And I think peer teams can very much be responsible for that. Whether it's linking up with if you guys have fitness coordinators, and if you don't, find the healthy peer coordinators and let them take on like that fitness coordination role as well. Because you've got to keep your people physically fit. That's like not an option. Like that has to be mandatory. So how we do that has to be important, but then how we address those who are injured, that's where a peer team can be really helpful. Because when you don't have when you give, and this is supposed to be your family that you give a lot more to than maybe your own personal family, and then all of a sudden you're out because of an injury, and all of a sudden it's crickets, that's devastating for many. And this, pedestal of I thought people cared, or I thought that I was part of something, and now maybe people reached out the first week, but now no one's reaching out. Peer members have to stay on top of someone who's injured and out, because if we're not careful, that's where you can lose a really skilled, tenured, respectable individual to something like an injury. And a lot of it's not just the injury making them feel that way. A lot of it is the mental toll of where's this support that we all talked about, right?
It's like when you have a death in the family, everybody's bringing over dishes to eat, right? That first couple of weeks, and then after that,
crickets.
Yeah, crickets.
Yeah.
And people. The problem is though, it's like on the department. 7/7 happens. You know what happens? The ball keeps bouncing, and life keeps bouncing, and personal lives keep moving forward. And I think you're right in that you have to stay onto it in this. Well, the wellness unit, one of the biggest components of it, I think, is going to be the most successful is the wellness checkpoints. Chief has already identified several types of incidents throughout the department that go on daily that command staff gets these incidents, and then we send them out to the checkpoint people and the peer supporters that are handpicked, and then they reach out to these officers just to see if they're okay. I have called like probably close to 90 officers now, and I've had some people walk up. I didn't even call them. They walked up to me and had like at the desk have a checkpoint. Same with Fig when he was about the interview. It helps. And it really doesn't matter. The people that I've contacted, they've been tenured veterans and also brand new rookies. There's been some people that the response has been it's overwhelming of positive. I've had one officer, they responded to a teen that hung herself, and it really bothered him. I sat and talked to him for almost an hour, and he said he has a daughter the same age, and it really affected him because he said it looked like a doll hanging from a tree, and it was this guy is hurting. He's going to have to carry this, but he said this is long overdue for this department. And I've had so many people tell me that, and like I said, the wellness checkpoints. I think they're going to be our meat and the potatoes. We're going to have a lot of meat and potatoes in this, but I think the wellness checkpoints and staying on that and learning from it and creating an infectious culture that it's okay to talk about and not just suffer in silence, right? Chief, you early on in your career, you've been on what, 27, going on 27?
Going on 27. Okay.
You told me before offline about an incident that there was one officer that was way ahead of the curve on checkpoints, 22 years ago? And can you talk about that incident and how that affected you?
Yeah, sure. So, again, when we were looking at how we were going to create this model and what we could do different, we all were forced to really look at, introspectively on ourselves and see what is it that has impacted us, what are we carrying, what kind of things have we done that worked and what didn't. This is how we're coming to the table mapping out this model. One of the things that I remembered, it's really weird. I was thinking one morning, I was like, what can we do differently? And I thought about this officer. His name, put his name out there. Lee Bollinger is his name for those that remember him.
He's been mentioned before by Baines. He did the same thing with Baines that you're about to describe.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. So Lee, for those that know him, he was a salty, rough-edged field trainer. He was rough, good, smart, good cop, but he was rough around the edges. He was definitely spoke his mind and had some of the negative stuff with him. But 22 years ago, I recall I had been on the police department for a few years, and I was on an evening shift, and I had gotten a critical missing call about a missing 9-year-old girl. And anyway, so I was driving to the apartment complex, and I pulled into an apartment complex and was shining my spotlight on the buildings, kind of looking at where the address was. And when a group of people, I see come running towards me. Anyway, so I mark out, let the dispatch know where I'm at and where the other responding officer, let him know where I'm at. And so this man, and he was a Turkish, it was a Turkish community. He spoke very little English, but he hands me this little girl, and she's drenched, she's in water, and he says she has little life left. And so anyway, the backstory is that she was a critical missing. She had left the apartment and fallen into a swimming pool, and the parents had found her. So he had handed her to me, and again, says she has little life left. So, you're trying to do your CPR as best you recall, and you're calling for an ambulance and trying to get people to back up so you can see if she's got some, if she's still alive or not. And this scene, flashes to, as I recall it, the next thing DFR is there, and Adolfo Rios was the other responding officer, and he did CPR on her as well. So DFR gets there, they're working on her. Then we're at the hospital scene, and I have this memory of just doctors surrounding her in the ER, working on her. And then it kind of, the only other thing I recall is when they told the family that she didn't make it. And so those three little scenes had just always, I kind of carried those. Never really got, ever forgot that scene. Don't talk about it much, obviously. But here's what happened. Next couple days at work, I just recall I wasn't sleeping that good. Wasn't really eating. Kind of in a daze. My sergeant asked me a couple questions, here and there, and I easily dismissed him. He's like, "Are you all right?" Yeah, I'm fine. Got back out there. Well, after a couple days of not really understanding why I wasn't, just didn't feel good. I wasn't eating, like I said. I wasn't sleeping. The most unlikely of officers, Lee Bollinger, sends me a message to my computer and says, "What's your location?" And I'm thinking, man, that's the last guy I want to talk to right now. But nonetheless, I send him my intersection. The intersection I'm at, and he pulls up, window to window, very, very curt, as "Hey, what's going on?" And I said, "Well, nothing," And he says, "Hey, listen, man, that scene that you went to the other night was those are tough scenes to go to." And then he shares a story. He says, "Reuben, when I was a young officer, I was working Central." He goes, there was a crash, and this story I remember. He says that I guess a pickup had crashed. And it had fallen on a little boy, and so the little boy, he said, was in shock, but he was still coherent enough for him to talk to him, and that he talked to this kid, and he knew that the kid wanted to be a fireman, and anyway, he says, "Reuben, that little boy died." He says, "And I never got help." He says, "I never saw anybody." He goes, "And I've been angry my entire career." And he says, "I don't want to see the same thing happen to you." And he, he knew that I was a kind of, I'm a faith guy. Generally talk about that, if it comes up. And he says, "I know you're a faith guy. Why don't you go see somebody? Go to that church you attend and talk to somebody." And I left that intersection and drove straight to a Catholic church that was down the way and knocked on the door, and a priest talked to me, and I'm even I'll share what this priest said, because this is something that I've carried for a long time, that I think I didn't realize it at the time until we really started building this unit, but the priest says to me, I tell him the story, and I said, I just can't sleep that well, and I feel bad for this family. I said, that's really all it is. I said, I just can't imagine losing your little 9-year-old daughter like that. And he says to me, he goes, what you're describing is grief. He says, and he kind of smiled, and he says, that is serving and going above, like I've never seen before. He says, you're carrying grief for another family that you don't even know. He goes, you're just trying to take some of the pain from them. And I thought, man, how incredibly powerful, and what a different perspective that I never would have considered in all the training that we have. I would never have pivoted to look at it from that position, and it helped me. But when I think back on 22 years ago, had it not been for Lee Bollinger, I would have white knuckled this like everyone else. I would have rubbed some dirt on it, suppressed it, and gone on. But it was Lee's checkpoint that he did that really changed a lot for me. And so now 22 years later, that's what we're putting in place.
That's awesome. Doc, you're up.
I'm just super moved by that story, and like you said, he was way ahead of his time when it came to wellness, and knowing that those are conversations that are so important and clearly possibly even changed the way that you approach this career. And I think when we talk about resiliency, the two things that you absolutely need in this line of work to be able to get through it and to be resilient is, the first one is self-awareness. You have to be able to sit with yourself. You have to be able to ask yourself, how am I doing with this? How am I holding this? And then only once we can identify like the what, then we can come up with the intentionality is then the how, right? So it's like, okay, how am I holding this? So maybe it's, I'm angry, the way that Lee said he was. Okay, what do I need when I feel anger? Maybe I need to move my body, or maybe I need to share this with someone to get some perspective. How am I going to do that? I probably need to reach out, or I probably need to make time for that walk today somewhere. That's how you ride the wave of it. And it changes with every incident, every shift. It's not always going to look the same because we're human, and what we need changes based on where we're at. And like you said, nervous system capacity. You might take on one call and you're like, I did pretty good with that. Your nervous system had capacity for it. But then there's times in life where maybe it was just a rough month of calls, or, that divorce is just eating your soul and you're not real proud of how you've been with your kids lately. Oh, and then we add a call. Your nervous system's not going to have as much capacity, so you're going to feel it different. So that's why awareness and intentionality have to be your two primary go-tos. But here's the kicker. What we know about trauma is it interferes with our ability to be aware. Because sometimes, like you said, we're in that daze, or we're just in survival mode. We're just trying to get through it. And that's where a peer can be so powerful, because sometimes someone else's awareness, someone else seeing something that maybe we don't see in ourselves, them bringing it to our attention, maybe doesn't make us fully aware, but it maybe cracks open the door of like, hey, slow down for a minute. Or, hey, I know that was a tough call, just to check in. And if you have the power as a peer team to give another human a little bit of awareness, that could save their career, it could save their life.
Again, it was taking a proactive approach to basically Lee comes up and snap his fingers to Chief to snap him out of it and consider something else that he may not have considered, and he didn't understand. And then made him aware, maybe I do need to talk to somebody. That's when he went to the priest. And I think that's what the checkpoints, that's what they are at the core, is to, I really believe, and I've had people, Dr. T, I've already recorded the fireman that basically reached out and said that he sought counseling because of hearing your episode and a lot of the other episodes. Some people just need a slight nudge. They're on a fence, whether they need help or not. And then when it could be a peer or just them becoming self-aware, I need more than what I can give to myself or what even the spouse can give or the significant other or a family member can give. They reach out to a professional like Dr. T and try to move forward and just understand what's going on with themselves, right?
Yeah, and if I can just say, Chief, I know you mentioned at the beginning, like mandatory debriefs, and we all know everyone kind of gets that thing in their gut. They hear the word mandatory in a department, they're like, what are you going to make me do? But it goes back to what we just said is, and there was a quote, I can't remember who said it, but it did come out of a physical program study for, I think, Fort Worth Fire, where they said voluntary programs become no programs. And they also, research shows that voluntary programs don't actually capture the individuals who need it the most. And it's because of that awareness piece. You might have someone who thinks they are fine, but they're in a daze in their life. And people don't know what they don't know until it's right there in front of them. And that's what I think a check is, a debrief is, a training is. It is that nudge to wake up a little bit. And that nudge, Joe, like you said, can do so much. So I encourage any chief who's listening to not be afraid of making things mandatory. When we have evidence behind it and research and science, you do what you have to do for people who don't know that they need it.
You could save a life. And a lot of things that we do, like crusty old Lee Bollinger coming up and asserting himself, it is sometimes like wrestling the keys away from a drunk driver. Some people don't realize they're swerving all over the road and they're in the ditch. Get them back on the road, right, and take the keys and help them along the way until they snap out of it. The wellness checkpoints, I'm really excited about that part, and I think that's going to be our bread and butter. Hey, Lieutenant?
Just one thing I want to add about the wellness checkpoints. This cannot just be coming from our wellness unit or the checkpoints. I think this is a opportunity for even a 2 or 3 year officer who sees his partner who's also been on 2 and 3 years struggling, being able to reach out and just ask, hey man, are you doing all right? We will not hesitate to go and cover another officer whenever they are in danger. So why should we hesitate when we see someone who is struggling emotionally or mentally, and like why do we do that, right? So I want to get to a point where we have the whole department being able to just reach out to their partner, a supervisor, to their troop, and just saying, hey man, are you doing okay? You want to talk about it? Let's normalize that.
Having a peer supporter or a wellness checkpoint person or another command staff or even a frontline supervisor reach out may not be enough. It may be the person sitting next to them in their car that they trust the most, right? Or the little group that they run with that recognizes something. We all know people on this department that we unfortunately at Dallas PD we have officers that get arrested for DWIs or other issues off duty. And there's a lot of their core friends that they saw warning signs, and they whether they just thought people were handling it correctly, or they just didn't want to say anything. They didn't want to be that intrusive in somebody's life. They said they didn't do anything, and the worst happened. Right. So taking a proactive approach and giving constant education, giving constant feelers out there with these checkpoints, that's what we want to do. Hey, Doc, you do something with first that you do checkpoints. I remember hearing you talk about this, and so which you can kind of go further what y'all do and reinforce what we're thinking about doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And first provides annual wellness checks, which is basically everything we just talked about. So it is with a licensed professional, but it's not a therapy session and it's not a fitness for duty evaluations. We don't do those. It's a 30-minute pause that might allow for a nudge where we use some subjective measures looking at anxiety, depression, and trauma. And so I'm able to sit down with someone. My team members are able to sit down with someone for 30 minutes. That can be in person or via, over telehealth. And it's just to check in to say, hey, what are your areas of concerns? What are you doing about it? More importantly, is it working? And if it's not, here's some skills that maybe we can do to address it. And then what's nice is if they have any questions, they can reach out. And if not, then I see them the following year and we're able to look at their measures again. And that way we're staying ahead of it. So if, 1 year they scored in the mild range for anxiety, and then I see them the following year, now they're in the moderate to severe range. Okay, that's their body cueing us into something's going on, and then we can get ahead of it. We just added in the physical component because the same way we talked about, you guys just go, and that takes a toll on your body. And you're not usually likely to reach out to like a physical therapist or make that appointment, but you might need it. We now have with our PT on staff, we're able to do annual wellness checks on the PT side. So again, it's a 30-minute check-in. He uses measures to kind of give you some data and some feedback, but it's your opportunity to say, hey, what areas are concerning? What are you doing about it? This might make it worse. This might make it better. If you need anything, first is here. And if not, then he can see you next year. And that way we're taking that top-down approach with the mental health check-ins, but then also that bottom-up approach with how is the vessel, how is the body holding up, because we want to get ahead of that as well, because that can definitely lead to some of the mental health issues if we're not careful with it.
Yeah, the beauty of the checkpoints is that we just by doing it in a few months, we've got so many stories of people reaching out. I have veteran officers that have stopped me in the hall, stopped me on the parking garage to talk about what the wellness unit is going to do, and they've brought up ideas to me that we haven't thought of. And one thing I would like to have happen is that we have 7 substations here in Dallas. So listeners have heard me talk about all of them when they're 1 through 7, right? I would like to have a lockbox at every substation with the owl logo, the beautiful Allen Holmes owl logo, with basically like some slips like for suggestions or feedback, and people, and you can do it anonymously. And if you say, hey, you may want to check on this officer, we're seeing some red flags, and once a week the peer support and the wellness unit go out and collect these and come back and review them as a group. And we're going to have some jackassery because cops are cops, right? But we're going to I believe we can also get some good intelligence and some nuggets that we can implement or tweak what we're doing because we're hearing from the masses, right? We're actually going to listen to the officers that are on the boots on the ground, what they're calling for. I think that's going to be a big thing. Sarge, you said you recently just had a walk-in checkpoint you dealt with?
Yeah, yesterday it was actually just a text I got from a coworker, and I've been out of patrol for 3 months now, and he texted me asking about my coffee pot on my desk at Southeast, and I'm like, is he messing with me? You know, I've been gone for 3 months, so he must know that I'm not there. So come to find out, he had also been out for a while because he'd been dealing with some things, and he didn't realize that I had taken this position in wellness. And so without him knowing, he tells me how, he lost his brother during that time. So he'd been dealing with some things. And, I took that opportunity as a checkpoint and told him, hey, if you need to talk to somebody, I'm here, reach out. And he was very appreciative of that. So, a checkpoint can come out of nowhere, and you can be talking about any old thing, and it turns into a checkpoint. And this doesn't, like everyone has said, it doesn't have to come from a command staff. It doesn't have to come from a supervisor. It, like you said, it could be your partner in your car. Who other than their spouse would know their partner better, than the person that rides with them every day. So don't be afraid to do that. And, we here in the wellness unit, we want to change stigma and what it signifies, right? And so I've come up with an acronym for it. Stigma is stop the ill-gained mental attitudes. And that's what we want to, spread, and want it to be contagious on the department.
It's decades. It's decades of dealing with this kind of culture, right? It's going to be a hard ship to right, and it's going to be a very slow burn, and inch by inch, turning it around. And Detective Moncada, this is the first time you've been on the mic. You've listened to the podcast. You do a lot of our social media for our posts, because I'm old and I don't understand hashtags and all that. You've got a story to talk about, or something you want to get off your chest?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to Sergeant Fig and Chief and Lieutenant for sharing their stories. Like I've said it before, I think it's very important to have you guys as senior officers / minorities, a female, because it wasn't long ago I was a rookie myself at Southeast, and you look up to senior officers to mentor you, for you to follow. And when Sarge was talking about his story about the shooting off of Botham John, and it was a long night. I kept hearing about it. I was off rookie corporal, but I was off on the weekends after the bid, and I kept hearing everybody talking about it, how long they were out there and how many people were shot, and obviously it made the news. And after detail, Sarge pretty smoothly says, hey guys, go ahead and write down this number. And I'm writing down the number, and all of a sudden he says, this number's for the psych services. And I know a lot of you guys are younger than 5 years, and it's for your first critical incident, critical call. People were down, tourniquets. I think we had a couple 27s, right, as well. So, and it was a young crowd, because it was a party of young kids, pretty much. And so, I was impressed. One, because I had seen the lack of just communication, sometimes from certain watches with that first line of supervision, which I think is very important. A lot of times you're a detail and they say, oh, we don't have anything else, and then you're off to go answer calls. And in my mind, I'm like, what do you mean there's nothing to share? I mean, there's stuff that goes on every day at different shifts that, just one simple, hey, remember to put on your seatbelt, or, he took that opportunity to share that. And so then he said, does anybody have anything else? And so then I shared how the ATO helped me and my spouse when we lost our first baby, and we took advantage of the psych services, and just how the ATO has also stepped up to, financially. I had to have surgery a few years ago as well, and here comes Sergeant Ed Lujan looking for me in the narcotics office, and he's like, "Ms. Mancata?" And I'm like, "Yes, sir." He's like, he just hands me this envelope, and you open that, and that's help that you need because you're out of work, you're paying for extra bills, and so I'm a huge fan of the ATO and just everything that they do, and officers like you guys that are stepping up to help other officers, because that's very important.
Yeah, it's important for us to lift each other up, right? And to establish something that's long lasting after we leave, right, Chief? We're getting old, so after we're gone, we want this to be so established that whoever takes the wheel can drive it with no problems, right? So another component I want to get into is the OWL newsletter. The OWL stands for Officer Wellness Longevity, okay, and that's what this is all about. We want to beat into officers' heads that this is a normal conversation to have in this profession. We want officers to have a long career of being well in body, spirit, and mind, right? That's the message we want to establish, and we want officers to have it in their tool belt. They got all these cool guns and knives, and they got tourniquets on, and we got to have a taser. Have these resources with you at all times if you need them, right? Officers work out all the time. If they're lacking in their shooting, they go to the range and they practice. This wellness is the same thing. You have to be equipped with the resources, and also changing the stigma in law enforcement in this topic. The newsletter is going to come out probably monthly. We're going to highlight an officer or a civilian of the month, and we're going to basically have an interview with them, and we're going to talk about what they do for wellness. And the people we're going to have on are also handpicked, and they're informal leaders, right? So if you're a supervisor out there and you know somebody that they deal with it in a positive way, and they're also an informal leader, or they are of someone of high character, that they have a story or they have a practice that they do on themselves that other people can learn from, please reach out to us so we can speak with them. We're also going to have a highlighted mental health professional of the month. The great Dr. T was the highlighted professional for the first OWL. Actually, when she got off the elevator, DeMarcus Black, who is one of the new wellness unit members, he recognized her from the OWL. So he's like, "Oh, you're Dr. T." We also are going to provide all resources for all psych services. We have bios of the psych service doctors. We have all the Assist the Officer Foundation counselors. We have links that go directly to substance and alcohol abuse, inpatient and outpatient care. We just want to equip the officers with every resource that if they need it, it's there and it's easy to find, and it's all in one place. That newsletter is going to be ever changing. We're going to start doing some videos and video interviews, as opposed to just having a bunch of stuff you have to read. That way you can see emotion, you can see responses, and we want you to get to know the doctors that we work with and work with us, and we also want you to know your peers. That people didn't know that Danny Canetti has a master's in music, and he's into classical music, and this guy can play several instruments, and people don't know that they don't know that he goes out and tries to climb Mount Rainier by himself. That's what he does to cope, and that's how he recalibrates his mind. I think people can hear that from somebody that's respected on the department, and they could take something from it. And if you help one person, that's more than that. That it's worth it. So the newsletter is going to be ever changing, and it's every month. We want it to look different. We don't want it to be the same thing you see hanging in the hallways and people walk by 1,000 times. We want it to be fresh. We want it to be Even with this unit, I would like to see this unit not look like in 2 years how it did in the first year. It's going to be ever changing, ever evolving, because the more we learn, we're learning as we go. And we're meeting with professionals like Dr. T and the psych doctors, Dr. Hall, Dr. Durr, and Conway, so that we're learning as we go, and we're picking bits and pieces from everybody that they have experiences, they have a passion to help officers, and that's what we want to learn from and build this on. This foundation, we want to be very solid. Chief, I want to get you to talk about, this is something that's really big that I can't believe has actually happened. Chief Garcia, what we mentioned before, there are several officers that have alcohol-related incidents off duty, and a lot of officers deal with it with alcohol. And in this profession, it's widespread. Chief Garcia just come out with something. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this was also a product of just some of the recent internal affairs investigations or cases that we've had to hear, and we see our officers being terminated for DWI arrests, and some of the other things as well that we've talked about earlier that involved in different disturbances and things that are alcohol related. And so Chief called me in and just said he wanted to create a policy that would afford our officers a benefit of 30 days of paid administrative leave if they came forward prior to a violation, prior to an offense or a policy violation. If they came forward and needed help, that we would, we would offer them 30 days of paid administrative leave to attend help, get that training. And he tasked the wellness unit with identifying locations, and then the wellness unit ran with it. And they found locations. They collaborated with our doctors, psych services, and found some locations that have been vetted in the area that specialize in first responders. The wellness unit will help with the onboarding process, connecting it with insurance and figuring out what deductibles or balances might be due. And then the wellness unit is collected through the Blue Guardian and with ATO. Just some mechanisms where we may be able to assist in helping out with some of that remaining coverage. So again, all very forward-thinking, proactive, prior to a crisis, prior to an incident. And that policy is it's already been sent to the city attorneys. There's still some language pieces, but it's gotten approval from both sides of the freeway on the city hall side as well as the PD side. So we should be announcing it shortly.
Yeah, and it's going to be a case-by-case basis. I mean, every circumstances and every case is going to be different, and everybody's got different needs, right? But for an officer or for anybody, you don't have to be in this profession, for anybody to come forward and be self-aware that they need help and they want to seek help, that's a huge step in recovery. Is Doc, you said the first thing in being resilient is being self-aware, right? And awareness. And that's Chief Garcia. That's Chief Garcia saying he had enough, and he wanted to do something about this, throwing out this olive branch and giving this option to officers. That's a big step in our department and in our growth, and hopefully to avoid officers falling apart and then us taking a reactive approach, right, and trying to clean up the mess, and then the families and the friends trying to clean up the messes of that the officers have found themselves in. I want to get some final takes. We're going to wrap this up. Chief, what direction do you want this unit to go, and why?
What was mentioned is, we want this thing, we know that it is ever evolving. We want it to look different next year than it does this year. I guess from just a broader sense, first of all, just make sure that the department understands that this unit is available to support sworn and non-sworn alike. And we recognize the burden that our non-sworn are taking on, certainly in those forward positions like 911 and physical evidence section that are out there on the front lines. But all the support casts, they're equally important. They're all vital to the overall success of this department. So this wellness unit is designed for everyone on the department and their families. I think as we start to get into the operational part of it, the investigative units are certainly a part of this initiative. The proactive component for the investigative units, and this is the tactical and special ops as well, is that we are going to set up biannual meetings where twice a year we are going to meet with squads, the unit and their supervisor, and really just talk about what the wellness unit offers, the new resources that we found, some of the details on how you get to them, what it would cost, what cost we cover, what cost insurance covers. Just really, again, serve it up to them, make it an easy decision where there's no research required by any of our officers, payment mechanisms and those types of things, so that they understand it and can just take advantage of some of the resources that are available. So the checkpoints are on the patrol side, as well as the investigative and special ops side. And then I think, in final thoughts, one of the things that I just want to put out there is that we're talking about is essentially changing culture. And this is this is a rich culture. We're talking 140 years in the making on the Dallas Police Department. And, we have every intention, and we have Chief Garcia's 100% backing we're going to overcorrect here to a degree. We know that the culture the pendulum has been on one side for a long time. And changing culture is not easy, but we have to go all the way to the other extreme now and get our officers to understand that we have missed the human part of this profession for a long time, and this is arguably the most human profession out there. It's an incredibly emotional profession. It's human beings doing jobs that are really, almost not human. And we're asking, we're putting people in some really difficult spots, and we've been. So we're going to overcorrect this thing and err on the side of supporting our troops. Empathy, compassion, and support are words that we don't always hear in this profession. And I will tell you that we are going to be not only teaching this locally, but we're going to be teaching this on a national level. I'll be teaching it at the International Chiefs Conference next month, or in October. There'll be 20,000 police chiefs there. We're going to drive this message home, and we're going to do what Dallas Police has always really been meant to do. We are, like I mentioned earlier, we may be the 9th largest police department, but this is an iconic patch we wear. For those officers that have had the opportunity to travel anywhere in this country, they know it. They know the way other police departments look at our police department, and it's an honor that we embrace, and we're going to take the lead on this. We're going to take point position, and we are going to push a message of empathy, compassion, and support, and we're going to have that message delivered by the right people, and do everything we can to overcorrect and change culture and get us back to middle and get us back to safe for ourselves and for our families. But it's going to take all of us. I mean, it is absolutely going to take all of us. And like Lieutenant Rivera said, it may be that new rookie on the street. It may be somebody in the academy doing this to their peers, our senior officers, in command and civilian and non-sworn. It's going to take all of us, but it's worth it. Our families are worth it. So I'm encouraged. I think we're going to get it done.
I do want to add that we have had a conversation regarding empathy and compassion and understanding, but we as a department, as a police force, have been told to have this type of attitude, feelings towards the public, right? We want to be more empathetic. We want to be reaching out, making connections, but yes, we are starting to have this conversation. Well, we need to have that with our own officers. We need to treat them like we want them to treat our citizens. So it is important that we pay attention to their emotional health, to their mental health, to their physical health overall, if we want them to be successful whenever they're making citizen contacts.
And just to piggyback on that, having a healthy officer, having healthy employees on the Dallas Police Department equals better service for our citizens. And that's what we want. We want our citizens to receive the best that we can offer, and that's ultimately the goal.
I just want to say thank you guys for letting me sit at this table with you. Really good humans And I am so proud of you, and I'm so proud of Dallas for what you guys are doing. One thing I will say is just remember, as you are putting this program forward, anything worth doing doesn't come without hurdles. So stay the course. Don't be discouraged by a lack of buy-in or low involvement initially, or like Omar, you put it so wonderfully, ill-gained mental attitudes, because change is uncomfortable, but sometimes change is necessary. So stay the course, and however I can support you guys, I just thank you for that opportunity. And then on the other side of that, what I will say is if you're listening to this and you are someone who could maybe benefit from, utilizing your peer team, I encourage you to look at cost-benefit analysis, because sometimes it's not always easy to admit that maybe I need help. It's not easy to be forthcoming in a wellness check with a peer team member. But you got to look at, if I don't, what might I lose if I don't? And the benefits of being vulnerable and utilizing a team like this that wants to see so much good and is coming from a place of good, do something with those good intentions, actually put it forth into action. So yeah, again, just really, really refreshing to see what you guys are doing. And I know you're going to set the standard for so many other departments.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Sergeant, Lieutenant, Detective Mikata, Sergeant Mosier sitting in. We're going to work our asses off to lay this foundation for this unit, because it's needed, it's necessary, it's long overdue. And this isn't just me saying this. This is from several of our peers that have said this to us. And we can see from the outside looking in, right, that this is a needed unit. This is a culture that needs to be changed, right? Police and fire, military, we need to turn this ship around. We want these human beings that are heroes, that are doing work. Like Dr. T, she said one time that this is like a bad human experiment. We sit an individual down for 20 plus years and have them look at image after image after image, and we expect them to go out and be normal human beings in the world. And that's just not feasible. That's not attainable, right? Especially in this day and age, when you bring in all the other circumstances and with the scrutiny that's now put on our first responders. This is needed. We're going to work tirelessly to make sure the owl soars for the Dallas Police Department. And we want this unit and this symbol of the owl to be recognized throughout the country, and we want to become the standard. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Chief, Lieutenant, Sergeant, and everybody that's going to be a part of this. ATO listeners, till next time.
Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, I'll pull you up. Clock leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run. Up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far, for the gold and the blue, I'll never give up.